Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I know it may have been a temptation to stay at home and get some yard work done. I know that's what I was doing yesterday. I felt like before the saps start running, I better take some branches down. So I spent about 4 hours with a pole saw and cutting up wood and stuff like that. So if I appear to be walking a little stiffly, that's why. Again, we've got lots of stuff going on in our lives, but it's really a blessing that you guys took the time to be here to give some of that time back to the Lord. What I'd like to do now is, as we get started, is if there are any kids who are 5th grade and under who would like to go and be part of the youth program in the back, I would invite you now to go back there. And Melissa Coleman is back there. She will, Melissa, if you want to raise your hand quick and wave, then kids know where to go. You guys can go back there now. So, I've got some good news and some bad news for you, and it's the same thing. 10 days from now is the first day of Lent, which is a little bit of a, we just got done with Christmas. It seems like, in fact, one of our 2 Christmas trees is still up down in the basement. I was sitting there noticing that the other day. It seems like Christmas just happened, right? And now we've got Lent, sitting there staring us in the face. And, if you're like me, some days you wake up and you go, oh, it's Ash Wednesday. Oh, I haven't really prepared anything for it. But I think coming here today gives us a little bit of an opportunity to maybe think about how we want to prepare ourselves for Lent. And it's interesting, on a related note, Father Scott said something in his homily this morning that really struck me. And it was from the second reading in second letter of Paul to the Corinthians. And I'm not going to try and quote it, but basically it says, in order to have a share of the gospel, in order to have a share of the gospel, I must live and proclaim the gospel myself. And I think that's enlightening, but it can also be a little bit scary, because I think that means that I might have to go out and do something with this faith of mine. And maybe some of you are like me, where many years I just kind of had this faith and it was just me and Jesus, and just kind of kept it all inside. But thank God, now I've learned to do a little bit better job of proclaiming the gospel, not just in the words that I say, but in the way I live my life. And I think that's one way that we can start to do that. And there's this old saying, which we've heard time and time again, which says you can't give away what you don't have. And so, I think sometimes we think, if I'm going to go out and proclaim the gospel, I've got to know all this stuff, and I've got to gain all this head knowledge and all that kind of stuff. And yes, that can help, but we also have to work on our own personal piety. And I just got done giving some talks on St. Dominic for our middle schoolers and high schoolers. And St. Dominic spent the first 30 years of his life basically in obscurity. He was a monk. He was a friar. He was just praying, and he was, doing the things that monks do, and just living that daily rule. And unbeknownst to him at the time, he was building up that piety that he needed to go out and do the things that he needed to do. He didn't have a plan like, I'm going to go out and start an order, and I'm going to have all be preachers and all this kind of stuff. No. God, he worked with God basically by preparing himself, and then God revealed that to him over time. And I think that's a really good example for us, is that we don't have to have it all figured out. We need to put ourselves in front of the Lord and let him do the work. And so that takes a lot of trust and surrender. And that's what we're going to be talking about today a lot, because, as adults, we're always taught, I've got to provide all this stuff for my family, and I got to be strong, and I got to do all these things, and that's all good and it's all necessary, but it also helps us to not surrender things to the Lord. It also helps us to not always trust in the Lord, because we're trying to do it all ourselves. And so that's something I would invite you into today, is just thinking about, as Lent is approaching, what am I going to surrender this Lent? What am I going to, is it going to be something, that's going to be, maybe easier, like a certain food or something like that? Or am I going to give up something that I really need to give up in order to take the next step of faith. And so I want you to be thinking about this tonight. What are you going to surrender this Lent? So now I get to the privilege of introducing a friend of mine, Danielle Chodorowski. I met her about 5 years ago when she brought her kids to join the faith formation nights at our parish. And it's been a great privilege working with 3 of her kids so far. They are an example of, the hope that can go out into the world. When I see them, I'm really encouraged, and it gives me a lot of hope. After, I think it was one of the Christmas time masses, her son David was home, and I saw him from across the church and kind of waved. And as I left, I'm out in the parking lot, and he's like, "Steve!" And he comes running over and he gives me a big hug. And I'm like, that's the heart of this family. That's who they are, and that goes, all the way from Dave and Danielle down through all the kids. And so I'm really looking forward to this talk. Danielle was, as many of you know, was supposed to give the talk in December and got really sick. And so, but she persevered and she's here with us today. And so with that, I'd like to invite up my friend, Danielle Chodorowski.
I have to admit, Steve made me choke up a little bit because my son's in college, so he's not here, and David is just a gem. So anyway, it is an honor to be here with you guys tonight and to share just a little bit of my story. And as Steve said, I am very glad you chose to come because the sunshine is glorious and I would love to be outside today. I am actually a transplant to Wisconsin. I was born and raised in the panhandle of Florida, where we have beaches that are white quartz. So they're the white sands that, the 2 feet of snow we had 2 weeks ago. If I was sitting in my kitchen looking out over our yard and the cornfield adjacent to us, I could kind of squint and look at the snow and think, that looks just like the beach. That is from inside my house where it's not -30 outside, but I love the Midwest. My first experience of the Midwest was attending college at the University of Notre Dame, where I actually needed to buy a coat and some winter gear for the first time. After graduating, I worked as a youth minister in Louisiana and then returned to the Midwest to pursue a master's degree in Christian counseling at Franciscan University in Steubenville. And it was there that I met my husband, Dave, and we were married 20 years ago this past December. We've been blessed with 7 kids. Our oldest is 19. I actually wrote 18 here. He would be very offended because he is 19. And our youngest is 1. So we are in college students and babies. It is the biggest odd experience that I never thought I would experience as a mom, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. So I'm changing diapers and giving advice about being an RA next year in college. It's quite surreal. The youngest of our kids are girls. So we have our youngest 3 are 3 little girls. And our 5-year-old in particular is fascinated by princesses. All things princess. We have the fancy princess dresses. We have the plastic tiaras. We have storybooks and movies. And they are all commonplace in our home. And as I was preparing for this night and praying about just sharing part of my story with you, I was reminded of one iconic princess scene. Okay, brace yourselves. It was from the original animated movie Aladdin. Okay, now Aladdin is standing on his magic carpet in true princess movie form, and he's extending his hand to Princess Jasmine, who's on the balcony, offering for her to come on an extraordinary ride, an adventure. And at her hesitation, he asks, "Do you trust me?" Right? I mean, if you've seen the movie, you can picture this scene. "Do you trust me?" And it was at that, she remembered this experience with him previously. She accepts. And the movie continues to play out their adventure. Now this question, "Do you trust me?" just kept ringing over and over in my heart. Now, it was not coming from a prince on a magic carpet. but it comes from the one who has known my inmost being, who has knit me in my mother's womb, and who knows every hair on my head. He knows me, he loves me, and it is his voice that echoes in my heart to build a relationship of trust with him. Now, trust in relationships is an essential element. We all know that, especially for a relationship to grow and flourish. Now, I have found in my relationship or my vocation as a mother, my trust in God has been pushed, it has been pulled, and it has been tested in so many ways. One of the most poignant experiences I had was on St. Patrick's Day in 2009. Our little family lived in Steubenville, Ohio, and it was March, right? So we finally had a beautiful sunny spring day to be outside. I was 34 weeks pregnant with our third child, and as I was playing with our 5 and 3-year-old, I began to have contractions. Now, this could not be because it was too early. It was not time to have a baby, so I dismissed it because I still had 6 weeks to go. Needless to say, the contractions didn't stop, they only intensified. I missed the awesome corned beef and cabbage dinner that had been cooking all day in my crock pot, and Dave and I went to the hospital just to make sure everything was okay. Due to several scary circumstances, I wound up having an emergency C-section that night. As they delivered our son, Dave and I held our breath as we waited to hear his cries. Instead, we could hear our pediatrician saying, "Come on, little guy, come on," in silence. And they proceeded to work on him for the next 5 minutes until he took his first breath. I can honestly say that those 5 minutes were the longest of my life. In that moment, where I lay completely and utterly helpless, with tears streaming down my face, I prayed. In my mind and heart, I placed him before the Lord and said, "Lord, he is yours first. I trust you. I trust you with his life. I trust that you love him more than I ever could. And I trust that you know best." This is what I consider to be my first of many Abraham moments. I refer to it as this, based on the story in Genesis. God, who has made a covenant with Abraham, has promised him that he would make a great nation of him, full of blessings and descendants more numerous than the stars. In time, God blesses Abraham and his wife Sarah with a son, their first, Isaac. It's a true miracle. It's truly God's blessing. And from that, they knew that this promise would be fulfilled, and this great nation would spring forth. However, in Genesis 22, God does something odd, like something that just does not make sense. He asks Abraham to take Isaac, build an altar, and place his son on the altar as a sacrifice to the Lord. Now, Abraham, being our father in faith, our father in trust, believed that even with this baffling act, that God was to be trusted to be faithful to his promises. Thankfully, as Abraham raised his knife to kill Isaac, the angel of the Lord stopped him. So this was my Abraham moment of placing our son on the altar before him. Joseph, who's actually over here, to this day continues to be an amazing blessing to our family. More recently, we had another Abraham moment. Back in February of last year, we welcomed our 7th child, a beautiful daughter named Genevieve. When she was roughly 3 weeks old, she started really struggling. She was struggling with difficulty breathing and swallowing properly. She would gag and she would choke. She had what's considered apnea, and at night she would skip breaths. She was losing weight in spite of many different interventions. I found myself many a night keeping vigil over her bassinet to make sure she was breathing. Again, on St. Patrick's Day, I am Irish, my husband's Polish, so I take this as like a personal blessing that St. Patrick has my back. But again, on St. Patrick's Day, we found ourselves being admitted to Children's Hospital, where Genevieve was given the diagnosis of laryngomalacia, which in her case would require immediate surgery and the placement of a feeding tube. All of this was extremely terrifying as a mom of a little 3-week-old baby. And we just kept taking one step in front of the other. In spite of such an unusual and scary situation, I felt a tremendous blanket of peace. As I spent my time caring for her in the hospital those 2 weeks, my prayer constantly became one of trust and surrender. Lord, I place Genevieve in your hands. She is yours first. I trust in you, Jesus. Your will be done. Thanks be to God. She is a normal, thriving, rambunctious little toddler who turns 1 the end of this month. She is absolutely amazing and such a gift to our family. With these experiences of trust came surrender, the belief that God's goodness was ultimately what was most needed. Trust with God, for me and frankly for all of us, is all about a relationship of love. My trust in the Lord has grown between my Abraham moments with Joseph and my Abraham moment with Genevieve. Trust grew because my relationship with the Lord had been growing. In the midst of these 2 experiences back in the fall of 2017, I got a call from my dad that he had been diagnosed with throat cancer. It was quite a shock because my dad had always been a physical rock, very diligent about his health. My prayer on that day was for the Lord to bring healing to my dad, physical, emotional, and spiritual, but ultimately for God's will to be done. My dad had lived a very successful life. He had worked hard and built a business in life that under all appearances was perfect. As he began radiation and chemotherapy, all those external things fell away. The power, image, and facade faded as my dad embraced his suffering. It was heartbreaking to watch him lose the ability to speak, to lose close to 70 pounds and only be able to take in liquids. Yet at the same time, there was a peace that surrounded him. He regularly met with the priest at our parish that had known my dad for 30 years. He received the sacraments as often as possible, as well as anointing of the sick, and he made amends with family members and friends that had been broken. These were the only the things I saw and experienced from being his daughter, but I saw the Lord working in miraculous ways through his illness. I was blessed to spend the last 2 weeks with him when he was in hospice. It was sacred ground. It was heart-wrenching at times to witness the suffering, yet grace-filled to know the Lord was at work. Oftentimes, when I would enter the room, my heart would just repeat over and over again, Jesus, I trust in you. I know you're here. I trust you. There really are no words adequate in those situations, but they united my heart with the Lord, and I knew he was doing something powerful in my dad. So although I had prayed for a miracle of healing from cancer, my dad experienced what I believed was the miracle of the healing of his soul, a reuniting with God and the gift of a peaceful death. He passed away in the early mornings on the feast of St. Joseph. So each day the Lord continues to ask me, in the little things and the big things, do you trust me? This relationship of love that the Lord has invited me and you into will continue to be full of areas and circumstances that we can surrender and entrust them to the Lord. The Lord is mindful of us. He's mindful of our needs, our worries, our sorrows, and our joys. And all he wants is to walk with us in those things. Just like faith, mercy, forgiveness, patience, love, trust is something we can practice and grow in. At times when I struggle to trust God in a certain area, I will often turn to his mother, Mary. She's kind of my go-to. If there's something that I feel like, well, Lord, I can let you carry me in this, but I'm going to keep one big toe on the ground just in case, right, ... just in case you're not trustworthy. However, when I find that I struggle to trust the Lord, I can always turn to his Blessed Mother, and I can trust her to walk me to Jesus, that she will help carry me. So if there's an area where you struggle to trust, she may be your go-to. But the other ways we can grow in practicing trust is to receive the sacraments regularly. There's a beautiful prayer of the Divine Mercy Chaplet where Jesus, I trust in you is a common prayer of. There's also a new novena called the Surrender Novena, which is one of my most favorite prayers that offers an opportunity of prayerful surrender and trust. And then there's also this prayer called the Litany of Trust. With Lent quickly approaching, as Steve mentioned, perhaps there may be an area in your life that you're feeling called to trust God in more. And one of the things we can do is add a spiritual practice. So it may be adding a spiritual prayer on a daily basis. But I thought we could end this time of my sharing by praying the Litany of Trust together. So I believe you received one when you came in. It's this little maroon prayer. And a litany is a prayer where the first part, at least in this litany of trust, the first part is a letting go of things that can hold us back from trusting God. And to that we respond, deliver me, Jesus. Then the second half of the litany is actually declarations of trust, in which we respond, Jesus, I trust in you. So I will pray the first part, and then we can all pray the second part together. So we're just going to take a moment, maybe think of one area that God is asking you to trust him in. Lay it before him in an Abraham moment. And let's press in. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. From the belief that I have to earn your love, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear that I am unlovable, deliver me, Jesus. From the false security that I have what it takes, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear that trust in you will leave me more destitute, deliver me, Jesus. From all suspicion of your words and promises, deliver me, Jesus. From the rebellion against childlike dependency on you, deliver me, Jesus. From refusals and reluctances in accepting your will, deliver me, Jesus. From anxiety about the future, deliver me, Jesus. From resentment or excessive preoccupation with the past, deliver me, Jesus. From restless self-seeking in the present moment, deliver me, Jesus. From belief in your love and presence, from disbelief. From the fear of being asked to give more than I have, deliver me, Jesus. From the belief that my life has no meaning or worth, deliver me, Jesus. From the fear of what love demands, deliver me, Jesus. From discouragement, deliver me, Jesus. That you are continually holding me, sustaining me, loving me. Jesus, I trust in you. That your love goes deeper than my sins and failings and transforms me. Jesus, I trust in you. That not knowing what tomorrow brings is an invitation to lean on you. Jesus, I trust in you. That you are with me in my suffering. Jesus, I trust in you. That my suffering, united to your own, will bear fruit in this life and the next. Jesus, I trust in you. That you will not leave me orphan, that you are present in your church. Jesus, I trust in you. That your plan is better than anything else. Jesus, I trust in you. That you always hear me, and in your goodness, always respond to me. Jesus, I trust in you. That you give me the grace to accept forgiveness and to forgive others. Jesus, I trust in you. That you give me all the strength I need for what is asked. Jesus, I trust in you. That my life is a gift. Jesus, I trust in you. That you will teach me to trust you. Jesus, I trust in you. That you are my Lord and my God. Jesus, I trust in you. That I am your beloved one. Jesus, I trust in you.
All my life you have been faithful. All my life.
Trust and surrender are really hard. But if it was easy, it wouldn't be called surrender. God wants us to give up our plans for His, because His plans are ultimately going to be much better for us than anything that we can imagine. I think I've got some pretty good plans for my life, and I've thought that in the past. And sometimes they've worked out, sometimes they've not. But it's hard. And I think once we realize it's hard, that actually makes it a little easier to think about, because we realize it's going to be hard. But Jesus doesn't say, I came so that you could have an easy life. He said, I came so that you could have life. And He has a mission for all of us. And maybe we're fulfilling parts or all of His mission now, and maybe we're not. And I can speak for myself. I got some things in my life I've got to give up to God. And I think maybe that's the first thing I have to admit to myself, is I've got some stuff I got to surrender. So maybe that's a good place to start when we have this time of adoration coming up. And so we're entering a time, I know a number of you have been here before, and maybe some of you, this is your first time. So we're going to have a time now of adoration. There's going to be some time when Jesus is going to be up here on the altar. And there's going to be some times when Jesus is going to come and walk amongst His people in a short Eucharistic procession. There's going to be some silence. There's going to be some times of music in there as well. But, again, just live and be in that moment. Go in there with no expectations. I know for me, I think my expectations are my biggest downfall, because I'm like, well, this is what I expect is going to happen. Jesus doesn't want us to live in a place of expectations. He wants us to live in His presence and let things happen as He wants them to happen. And so ask those questions. Lord, what is it you want me to surrender? Lord, how can I trust you more? Help my trust in you. That litany was incredible. There was 2 or 3 things in there that really sparked some things in me that really inspired me. So thank you for bringing that, Danielle. So adoration. For those of you that have done this before, this is going to be a review. But for those of you, maybe this is your first time, or maybe it's been a long time, Jesus is going to be placed in His Eucharistic form up here on the altar in a monstrance. And we're going to just have some time to be there. And I always, whenever I think of adoration, I think of that quote from John Vianney. I can't remember if it was him or if it was someone that he was talking to, that said, somebody asked, what do you do during adoration? And he says, I sit there in the pew, and I look at Him, and He looks at me. It's that simplicity that the Lord has invited us into. Okay? And so just spend that time in prayer. And if you're struggling with Jesus in the Eucharist, say, Jesus, I don't get how that's you. Help me help my faith in the fact that it's you and that I can come to you. That's what he wants. That's okay. That's okay if you're struggling with that. Jesus wants you to invite him into that. If you're distracted during this time of prayer, bring that distraction to the Lord. We're also going to have a time where we have opportunity for confessions. And so when that happens, we've got 4 priests here that are going to be hearing confessions. I would invite you to, the line's going to start back here in this corner. You'll see some chairs along the back. That's reserved for people who are in line for confession. It'll come up here. There'll be a volunteer here that'll direct you on which confessional is open. Okay, so take that opportunity if you're feeling called to that. Another opportunity that we have is going to be, we have some people that will be willing to pray with you. Sometimes, it's like, I don't know what to pray for, or it's difficult to pray for myself. And so we have 2 men and 2 women who are going to be prayer teams in the back. And so there's some chairs along this side. I think there's chairs along this side. Can't see chairs, but over in that corner in front of the cry room, you can meet over there. And I'll be back there, and if you want to come back and have somebody pray with you, that's a good opportunity to do that, because sometimes that helps us focus our prayer a little bit. When somebody else is praying with us, it can really help us a lot. So I would invite you into that time as well. And so, we're about to enter a time of adoration now. And so, in a moment, Father Scott is going to come out here, and he is going to present Jesus in front of us. And if you're not sure what to do, there's some people here that do, just kind of follow what they do in terms of when they kneel, when they stand, and that type of thing. But again, work on that surrender. Work on, Lord, what do you want me to do during this time?